Good morning. My name is Melissa Lacombe. I am with Roanoke College. I'm here at Roanoke County Public Schools Administration Office. And while I was hoping to be at Glenver High School next month, unfortunately the pandemic has caused us to seek other alternatives. So while I'm sad that I'm here and not there at Glenver to meet you all, I am happy that we are able to offer this opportunity to tape the presentation. And there'll be an opportunity, I've got my contact information at the very end, so while we won't have actual questions asked of a group in person, I will be available to answer any questions that you may have. I am here today to talk a little bit about financing college education. As I said, my office is located at Roanoke College, and while I am a representative of Roanoke College, I've tried to make the presentation as generic as possible. I've offered some opportunities. Roanoke is a private institution, but I've offered some information in the presentation regarding public schools as well. A lot of the information that I present, the examples that I give, will certainly probably be more focused towards Roanoke College examples because that's what I know, but I certainly can address questions later on. As I said, I'll give you my contact information. I can address questions of anything related to financial aid. Before we go ahead and jump into the presentation, I did want to tell you a little bit about myself before we jump in. I am an Associate Director of Financial Aid at the college. I've been there for 20 years, and this actually was one of my first assignments that was given to me to do a presentation for Roanoke County Public Schools. So this, I think, is my 20th or 21st time doing this. Obviously the first time doing it electronically, but I've got some experience. I went to Roanoke College, so my family went through the financial aid process, and I think that's going to be helpful because I designed the presentation to hopefully answer some of those same questions that you all have. I had them when I was going through the process, my parents had them. So while I don't think you're going to leave the presentation today knowing everything there is about financial aid, hopefully you'll leave with a little bit more knowledge and an opportunity and a contact in the field should you need it. I am originally from Vermont. However, we moved here my senior year in high school. I went to Cave Spring High School for a year. So again, I'm a Roanoke County graduate. With that, I'll go ahead and get started. We do have a lot to cover. This is a little bit of a glimpse of the presentation. There are some slides that I will go through rather quickly. At the end, as I said, I'll give you my contact information and encourage you, if you'd like a copy of the PowerPoint, you can give me a call or shoot me an email and I'll be glad to send you an identical copy so that you'll have everything that we talk about today. We're going to briefly touch on college costs, how they've risen over the past several years, what to look for in the future. We're going to talk about the different applications for financial aid. We'll talk about the different types of financial aid at the institution level, of the state and the federal level. I've got a few slides in there that I'll go over briefly about scholarship searches and some things to look at, and then a slide of some additional notes that I wanted to draw your attention to. With that, we will go ahead and get started. And the first thing I want to draw everybody's attention to is the cost of college. I graduated from Roanoke in 2000. Costs are dramatically different from when I went through the process, and I'm assuming that if parents are watching today, you're probably not going to be as familiar with the cost of education as it stands here in 2021 for your seniors or juniors that are in the high school process. It's estimated to increase. You're probably looking at about 5 to 8% increase each year. And I don't tell you this to scare you, I tell you just so that you're informed. You don't want to go into this kind of blind and not expect that tuition has risen. When tuition when I was in college was probably about $16,000 at Roanoke. It's now up to $45,000. So while not all colleges will have increased that much, you are going to see some different costs from when you went through the process. I've given you, I don't know if you can see it up here, it's a little grayed out, but a URL that you can go out to kind of get an idea of what the college cost would be at the schools that you are interested in looking at. And again, know that what you're looking at today may increase from year to year. And again, I don't tell you that to scare you, I just want to make sure that you're right on, as educated as possible before you delve into the process. But I also want to let you know that you're not expected to foot the bill 100% on your own. There is financial aid available. It's available to you regardless of what school you're attending, whether that's a private school like Roanoke, a public school like Virginia Tech, or even a community college like Virginia Western. Financial aid is available. You are not expected to foot the bill. You can see from the slide, about 85% of our student body at Roanoke College is getting some sort of financial aid. So there is some assistance out there. Again, not to scare you with the cost, but there is going to be some financial aid to assist you in covering that. And you can see the average award at Roanoke is about $31,000. So as I said, tuition was about $45,000, so there's a good chunk of it could be covered by financial aid. I do have to kind of put a disclaimer in there, however, 100% of your cost is not going to be covered. So you can't go into this thinking that your student is as brilliant as Albert Einstein is going to get a full financial aid package. Well, there are some instances where that may occur. The majority of students are going to have some additional costs that will fall to them and their families. So again, there is going to be financial aid available, but you need to make sure that you recognize that it's not going to be free in most instances. There is going to be some cost to you, so you need to start planning now. You need to educate yourself. Go to presentations, take advantage of anything that's offered like you're doing today by watching this presentation, and educate yourself. Go out to the websites of the different schools so that you are prepared, that you are not surprised when your student starts to apply and starts to get financial aid packages and you start seeing that bottom line. What you don't want to happen is for that to be the first time that you see that cost and just be staggered by it. You need to educate yourself not only so that you can go through the process easily and know what kind of questions to ask, but you also don't want to commit something that could cause issues in the future. I've given you some examples up here. Let's say you're not educated and you just say, I'm not going to worry about college costs, I've got my retirement that I can use to cover my students' education. And that's great, but that retirement is supposed to be used for your future expenses. If you use it all now on your students and their educational costs, you're not going to have those funds to live with. And if you choose to kind of go in blind and say that's how I'm going to cover it and you don't explore the financial aid opportunities, then you could potentially cause some issues for yourself in the future. Or maybe you go into it thinking, I'm just going to take loans. I'm not going to worry about anything else. And that's certainly a possibility, but again, if you ignore the financial aid, don't take advantage of the grants, meet the deadlines that are set out there because you just don't know about them, then you could potentially be borrowing funds at much higher rates than are necessary. So start educating yourself. You've taken the first step by turning the presentation on and sitting here and listening to me, but continue to educate yourself. Anytime there's financial aid opportunities available at the school level as you're going through the process, or at the high school, if they're offering a speaker to come in, or they've taped a presentation like they did today, take advantage of it. There's never any reason why you shouldn't just sit through and listen. Even if you think you know everything, you're going to walk away learning a little bit more, okay? As I said, the presentation is designed, again, to give you an idea of the types of aid and the applications. You're by no means going to be an expert after you leave here, but hopefully you walk away with a little bit more knowledge so that you don't cause one of those or commit one of those things in the previous slide that could adversely affect you in the future. We're going to talk a few slides here about the actual application process. First, we want to talk about applying for the college merit-based aid. These are grants and scholarships that do not need to be repaid. So as you start to get award letters, if you see the word grant, scholarship, award, those are free funds that do not need to be repaid after graduation. Those are the best of the best, and the ones that you want to take advantage of first. Some of them may require a separate application. There's something called the CSS profile, which is from the College Board. It's a series of questions that you'll ask. It's actually a lot of questions, very in-depth questions, variety of topics between demographic information, family households. They'll ask about your assets, your income, so very in-depth. That may or may not be required at your individual school. You usually see that CSS profile required at the more expensive schools. Some examples here in the state of Virginia might be Washington and Lee, perhaps, University of Richmond, a little bit more expensive than the state schools. Roanoke does not require this, It is important that you know what your school requires because there is a cost associated. It's not a huge nominal cost, but you don't want to pay any extra than is necessary. So contact the individual schools and see if the CSS profile is required. If it is, go ahead and add their name to it and they'll get the information. If it's not, there's not any need for you to do it, okay? As I said, it's a pretty invasive application. It'll ask a lot of information about custodial and non-custodial parents, so it's information that if you don't need to supply, you don't want to. So make sure to know and contact. Some other schools may have individual applications that are specific to their school. So you'll need to contact the financial aid office and ask them if they have a separate application. A large majority will not, but you'll want to again make sure that if they do, you don't miss that deadline and can get that application completed. What will happen is that application will set into motion a review for these merit-based aids. So the application may have information pertaining to your high school performance, and we'll look at your grades, standardized tests, if you're able to take them. I know the pandemic has kind of caused a lot of the tests to be canceled. So some schools may be altering their review as a result of the pandemic. It's important that you contact them and know whether or not they're still going to require tests, and that would be the ACT or the SAT. So we'll look at high school performance to award some of these grants. Some schools may also have honors competitions or scholarship competitions where you participate in an interview to secure some of these funds. Some schools will offer athletic scholarships or performance scholarships. Division I and II will offer athletic scholarships. Roanoke College is Division III, so there is no athletic scholarship if you attend a Division III school. Again, Division I and Division II may offer athletic scholarships. Some schools may also offer performance scholarships. For instance, Roanoke has a choir. Students that participate in choir and audition could receive additional scholarships based upon their performance. We also have theater, fine arts, and instrumental music. So you're not going to know what each individual school offers unless you ask or you go to their website, seek that information out. These are free funds that you want to take advantage of. So you want to exhaust all opportunities, make sure you know what that application deadline is if it is required so that you don't miss out on these. The next application that all of you will want to start thinking about is the free application for federal student aid. That's the FAFSA form. You can see from the presentation it is available October 1st for the following year. So this October, here in just a couple of weeks, the FAFSA for the 2021-2022 year will be available. I've given you the website again. I apologize, it's a little light up there, but it's studentaid.gov. You can go out there and the application will be available again October 1st. If you were to go out there today, the application for the current year is available out there, so you could go out there and look at it. But if you are a senior getting ready to graduate, you won't be able to do yours until October 1st when that becomes available. The State Council of Higher Education of Virginia has a great website. I've given you the link as well as a screenshot of what that webpage looks like. I would encourage all of you to go out to that webpage. They have a great listing of all of the Virginia schools and their FAFSA deadlines. It is very important, again, similar to the previous slide where I talked about the institutional application, it's very important for you to go out there and know what that application deadline is for your particular schools. They vary from school to school. There is no set deadline. And at some schools, because of the allotment and the availability of financial aid, if you miss a deadline, you may be out of luck. So educate yourself. So we've talked a lot about that already this morning. We're not that many slides in. Educate yourself, know what the deadlines are so that you don't miss those. This is a great website that will help. Obviously, you can call the individual schools. You can go out to their websites. They've got their dates and deadlines published. But this is a great resource that will allow you to kind of look and get that information from multiple schools. Okay. As I said, the FAFSA is available online beginning of October 1st through that studentaid.gov site. First, however, before you apply and fill out that application, you will need to obtain what's called an FSA, a Federal Student Aid ID and password. You can go directly either through that studentaid.gov website or directly to the URL that I've provided up here on the screen. And you'll have a screen that will pop up that will look similar to this. You'll have to supply some information. Both a student and a parent will need to supply the information. So you'll each need to get your own FSA ID and password. When you go out there, they will ask you information about your name, your address, your social security, your birth date. They will encourage you to set up challenge questions. So if in the event that you forget either your username or your password, you can answer the challenge questions to retrieve that information. I will tell you the challenge questions, when you answer them, they are case sensitive. So be very careful, be cognizant if you put the maiden name is Smith and you alphabetize the S in that. When you go to retrieve it, you have to type it exactly as you did when you set the challenge question up. So make sure you do that. Again, every student who intends to fill out the FAFSA form needs a FSA ID and password, and at least one of the parents will need it. That FSA password or username and password, once issued, will be good for a lifetime. So what that means is that students will need to keep up with it for each subsequent year. They're in their undergraduate, and if they intend to use it also for their graduate school. It is good for a lifetime. So what that means, again, is that a parent who might have multiple students going through the process needs to just obtain one, and they will use their same username and password for each of their children. Even if they're not, sequential immediately year after year, maybe they've got an 18-year-old that's getting ready to graduate this year, and then a 10-year-old that will be down the line several years later. That FSA username and password will be good for a lifetime, so make sure you keep up with it because it's going to give you access to submit the FAFSA. It'll serve as your electronic signature for both the student and the parent. It will allow you to go back in and make corrections should they be needed. It will keep you accessible to your student loan debt. So as students start to secure loans and take on debt, they'll be able to log into the website with that username and password and keep up with their loan indebtedness. Same with parents. And it will also offer an opportunity to log in and get information about who you're going to repay later on. So it's a very important set of information that you'll want to kind of put in the cookie jar, keep it aside so that you don't lose it, because if you do, again, you've set up challenge questions, you can retrieve it, but sometimes it's very difficult if you forget what those challenge questions are. Or perhaps you set it up with an email address last year and you've got a new email address. It makes it a little bit difficult if you don't keep up with it. So make sure, again, you go out there, get that FSA ID and password. You can do that at any time. If you want to get a jump at the game, I've already told you the FAFSA is not available until October 1st, but you could go out here and get that username and password now so that you have one step that's completed. It does usually take about 24 to 48 hours to verify your identity, so you'll want to go ahead and try to do this before you fill out the FAFSA. Once you have that username and password, then you're going to be ready to access the FAFSA website. Again, it's studentaid.gov. I do want to caution you, not as much of an issue now as it has been in the past, because the Department of Education has kind of consolidated all of the websites. They had a FAFSA website, they had a PIN website, they had different websites for all of these applications. They've kind of combined them into the one, studentaid.gov. But there are a lot of companies out there that are trying to make a buck, and they may charge you to fill out the FAFSA form. So when you go out, this is currently what the website looks like. Always look to make sure that federal student aid is on that website. If you go to a website, you don't see that, you start entering your information, it starts asking you for credit card information, that's a clue that you're not at the correct site. There is something called FAFSA.com that will charge you to fill out that FAFSA form. This is a free application for federal student aid. You should not pay anybody to assist you with this form. If you need assistance, contact the school, contact me, and I'll be glad to help you. And I make that offer, I don't make that offer lightly. I am going to be available to you regardless of whether or not a student is interested in Roanoke. As I said at the very end, I'll give you my contact information and encourage you to contact me. If you need assistance with the FAFSA, I will be glad to help you. Now certainly my allegiance needs to first go to those that are interested in Roanoke. So if I've got a conflict with an appointment, I may need to put you off, but I will be available to assist you. So do not pay anybody, go to the correct website. If you need assistance, contact me. Do know a couple of notes about this site. The Department of Education maintains it. They've put a lot of money into making it a sophisticated site. So don't panic if you try to use a computer that's maybe a little bit older. There are certain browser requirements. so you may have some issues if it doesn't work. Again, it doesn't mean that your computer's not working if the website's down, it just means your computer's not capable of pulling up that software. We don't see that as many times nowadays, but if you get into that instance, most of the computers here at the high schools are capable. Local library, provided they're open after the pandemic, should be available to access and fill out this form. It is a very secure site. It directly submits. Once you hit submit, it goes directly to the Department of Education, and it's quick. Usually is processed fully within 72 hours. If you think about when you, there is a paper application available, although I strongly discourage it, but if you can't fill it out online, you could do the paper. If you think when you fill out that paper, you mail it through the Postal Service, how many hands that thing touches, it could get lost. There's lots of sensitive information. So this is much more secure and it's much faster. When you mail that physical form in, whether it's the actual FAFSA or a signature page, it has to go to Mount Vernon, Illinois, where somebody manually enters it, and then they will spit the results back to the school and to the students. So that certainly could take upwards of 2-3 weeks just to get through the Postal Service and through that manual entry. So this is the FAFSA form. Again, studentaid.gov, you'll click and then complete the FAFSA form. Very user-friendly. The Department of Education has a lot of great help functions out there that I encourage you to utilize. When you first go in there, you'll just click on the Start Now button. If you're a returning user, again, it's very clear where you click. And as long as you take the time to read, you shouldn't have any difficulty maneuvering through the process. After you hit submit, whether it's electronically you hit submit or you physically mail that application in, it goes to central processing, which again is in Mount Vernon, Illinois. And what will happen is the calculation, the expected family contribution calculation will begin. You know, I don't know if any of you have heard of that before, but that is often abbreviated as an EFC. And I want to educate you a little bit more about what that EFC is and how it's used. Just so that you don't panic when you see that form and you can understand a little bit about it. The FAFSA form and the information that you supply on that application is the means by which the Department of Education officially kind of looks at your income and assets and compiles them into kind of a nifty, neat little package for the schools to use. It basically is a calculation that will determine how much the Department of Education says a family can afford to pay each year to send the student to school. It is not by any means a bill, and it is not meant to be looked at and seen as the actual balance that you're going to pay. It is really more of a tool that the school utilizes to determine the types of aid and the amounts of aid that you are eligible for. So when you see that form, if it comes back and says $32,000 is your EFC, don't panic. It does not mean that you're going to get a bill from every school for $32,000. Again, it's just a tool that we will utilize to award the financial aid. The EFC calculation, it's not just this arbitrary formula the Department of Education put together. There's a lot of review, a lot of analysis that went into play when calculating that formula. So I give you a little bit of information again so that you're educated and know that it is not an arbitrary factor. What the Department of Education, when they first developed this form, they kind of looked at it and came up with these 4 principles that they put into place just to get a better understanding of what they needed to do, how they needed to do it, so that everybody could be treated in the most equitable manner. And they went into this calculation review by looking and saying, to the extent that they're able, parents have some responsibility for putting their kids in school. It's not the responsibility of the taxpayer to front their bill. These parents, whether they intended to or not, they had these children. It is the parents' responsibility to help cover some of those costs. They also went into the calculation as they started to develop it saying, you know what, students have some responsibility too. It shouldn't be all on the taxpayers, shouldn't be all on the parents. Students have a responsibility to help pay for their educational costs. The other thing that they thought of as they're starting to develop this form is that everybody needs to be treated equitably. So they needed to develop something that not only would treat Sally from New Jersey and then Joey from DC, they needed to treat them as much as possible on an equitable manner. and they needed to be evaluated on their current circumstances. So they looked at those 4 principles, and they developed what's called the federal methodology. And this, as I said before, is a complicated formula the Department of Education developed to calculate the EFC. And what they look at to calculate this EFC and through federal methodology are your parents' income. So they look at, and you'll see all of this as you fill out the FAFSA form, they're going to ask tax information, they'll ask adjusted gross income information, they'll ask information from your W-2s. So anything that's taxable, they're also going to be asking about untaxed information. So whether or not a student or the parent gets child support for their student, they're going to be asking all of that information. So they look at parent income, they look at student income as well. So we're going to look at students' income from work, if they file taxes, that's all going to be compiled together. And we look at both of their parent assets as well as student assets. Now obviously the federal government does not expect that parents will put 100% of their assets towards their college education. They're not that evil. They do expect that parents have been saving for retirement, as you should be. And they're going to, in the equation, you're welcome to Google the EFC calculation if you would like to. As part of our training as financial aid administrators, we actually have to manually calculate it. It's very, very in-depth, but there are certain allowances and protections. To give you an idea, for assets, the Department of Education, usually it's anywhere from 10 to 12% of your assets will be included into the calculation if you are a parent. Again, they're protecting some of those assets for retirement, for other things. Whereas 30 to 35% of the student assets are considered in the equation. I don't tell you all of this to complicate things and make you all kind of fuzzy and not know. I tell you this just so that you know it is not a random process. There is a lot of information that goes into this. There are allowances based upon where you live. It costs more to live in northern Connecticut, in the Greenwich, Connecticut area, than it does in rural Kentucky. So there are allowances based upon that. There are allowances based upon how far the oldest parent is away from retirement. The closer they are to retirement, the more of the assets that will be protected. So there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes that you need to know about. You don't need to know all this nitty-gritty, but you need to know that it's not this random process, and it is really a calculation that is designed, again, to treat everybody as equitably as possible, but also to put a little bit of responsibility on the parent and the student, okay? So once that EFC is calculated, the Department of Education will then return back to the students what's called a student aid report. And that will show you everything that you submitted to them will be kind of regurgitated back on that form. And it will show you in the upper right-hand corner that EFC that we just talked about, that expected family contribution. Again, don't panic when you see that figure. By no means does that mean that that's what you're going to be getting a bill for. It's, again, a tool that we will utilize, because at the same time that you are getting that student aid report, and usually you get it within a matter of a few days, they do tell you it could be up to 2 to 4 weeks after, but once you get that, Roanoke College and all of the schools that you've identified will also receive those results. Now, I do caution you, some of the stuff coming from the Department of Education does have a tendency to go to your spam folder or your clutter. So if you fill out your FAFSA on a Saturday, usually it's processed by the following Tuesday, and you will get an email. The student, whatever the email address is that's listed for the student, will get an email to tell them that their student aid report is ready to access. It is very important that you get that email and click in there and access the student aid report. If you don't get that email, again, check your clutter, check your spam, and make sure it doesn't go there. Because what you'll do is you'll print that form off and you'll review it for any errors. As I mentioned, the schools will also receive those results, and we will be making financial aid packages available to you based upon those results. So if there's something on that form that isn't inaccurate, that could potentially need to be fixed, if you don't review that student aid report, you're never going to know that there's an error out there. And financial aid awards are going to be coming to you, and if later on an error is discovered, the financial aid may need to be adjusted. So it's very important that the student review that form, and it wouldn't hurt for the parent to review it either. Both of you can check each other's work and make sure everything is accurate because again, the schools are going to be getting those results and we're going to be making financial aid packages available. The first being incorrect demographic information. Department of Education does a lot of different cross-checks with other agencies within the U.S. government. For instance, the Social Security Administration. If you accidentally transpose 2 numbers of your Social Security number in this form, that cross-check cannot be performed. So what that means is that the Department of Education is not going to be able to accurately process the form. They're going to put a note to you on that first page of that student aid report to tell you that that check couldn't be performed and you need to get it resolved in order for the financial aid to be able to be officially awarded and go through. If you spell your name incorrectly, again, that check cannot be performed. So everything down to the spelling of the first name, last name, Social Security number, birth date, all of that needs to be accurate. If you supply them an email address that is incorrectly entered in there, they can't correspond back to you. So everything needs to be correct. There's also some parent information that is requested on that form. First initial, last name, Social Security and birth date of both biological or parent 1 and parent 2. If you supply incorrect information there, that could cause delays as well. The most common error that we see that kind of fits into that category, as I said, it asks for parent information. So let's say mom and dad have been married, have always been married, but mom never actually changed her name with the Social Security Administration. So when you fill out the FAFSA form, the name that needs to be listed is the one on the Social Security card. If you put a different name, even though she may have always been known by her married name, if she is legally still known on that card by her maiden name, it's her maiden name that needs to go on the FAFSA form. So everything needs to be accurate. Double check and make sure that you do that. Again, if you cause an error inadvertently, that first page of that student aid report will draw your attention to it, and schools will start following up, drawing your attention to it too. That could cause delays, so make sure everything is accurate. Next one, student or parent income information or signatures were missing. I'll kind of address those 2 separately. First being income information. Let's say you knew that the FAFSA became available October 1st. It's October 1st. You're going out there. You don't really have the time. You didn't set things up in terms of your schedule. You've only got about 15 minutes and then you'll come back to it later on. So you want to get things started. In your mind, you're thinking, I'm going to give the Department of Ed a heads up to start processing the form, and then I'll submit it later on when I've got more time. You can't do that. If what you need to do is kind of identify a slot of time, an hour should be plenty to fill out the FAFSA form. If you've only got 15 minutes, that's not the time to fill out the form. Set aside an hour, sit down, fill it out in its entirety. Do not leave things blank. You do have the opportunity to use the IRS data retrieval to retrieve a lot of the information, income information. Do not leave it blank, because once you hit submit, Department of Education is going to see it's incomplete and they're not going to do anything. It's going to sit there until you supply the information. So it could cause major delays. The same is true for your signature. If you hit submit without using your FSA username and password for either the parent or the student, the Department of Education is going to sit on that form for up to 2 weeks before they compile anything. And then after that 2-week time frame, then they're going to notify the schools that a signature is missing. So it could have dramatic delays if you forget to submit your signature. If you do not have an FSA username and a password, you do have the opportunity to print a signature page and mail that in. Again, that could cause delays, but at least you're submitting the signatures at that point. So make sure all income figures are reported. Utilize the data retrieval. If you don't have a handy copy of your taxes, really you want to utilize the data retrieval regardless. It's much easier, and make sure that both the student and the parent submit their signatures utilizing their username and password. Next one, number of family members in the household and the number of college do not correspond. A couple of years ago, you can see the example that I gave you is that a parent in college cannot be counted. The Department of Education was convinced that they were dealing with some pretty savvy families where parents were educated, which is great. But the Department of Education was convinced that parents were out there to kind of beat the system. They thought that parents were out there maybe taking a photography course at Virginia Western just so they could gain the benefit of having multiple people in school, because anytime you have multiple people attending college on at least a half-time basis, it does tend to lead to more financial aid. That's true. The Department of Education was convinced that parents knew that and were trying to beat the system by going out there and just taking that photography course that they always wanted to take. They said, you know what? We don't care if mom or dad are at least half-time in degree seeking. They can't consider themselves as attending college. Now, I'm going to talk later on where you'll make the individual schools aware of mom and dad's educational status of at least half-time degree seeking. But for purposes of the FAFSA, parent in college cannot be counted. So let's say you've got a family of 3, mom, dad, and student. Regardless of mom and dad's educational status and their current enrollment, the answer to the series of questions should be 3 in the household and 1 in college. Again, you can let the schools know individually. You'll contact them and let them know that mom is in fact degree seeking at Virginia Western and these are her costs, and you can supply that information. But for purposes of FAFSA, you cannot count a parent as attending college. Income figures were reported twice or not placed on the correct line. Honestly, this error comes about just because people are going too quickly. They're not taking their time and they're not reading the questions. Obviously, if you use the data retrieval, this becomes a moot point. Again, another reason why you would want to use that data retrieval, because it pulls exactly what you need. But if for whatever reason you choose not to or it's not available to you, make sure to read the instructions and pull off the correct line. We see a lot of folks that are putting the same amount of adjusted gross income and the same amount of taxes paid. And I know it feels like we're all paying our money back out in taxes. It's not the case. And the Department of Education knows that. So if things look askew, and if you commit that error, it could have dramatic effects on financial aid. It could actually display that you might be eligible for more aid than you really are. And when that's corrected later on, you're going to lose aid. So make sure that everything is accurate, that you pull off the correct line. As I said before, the Department of Education has great help functions. They tell you exactly what line to take the information off your tax return. So just read the question and it should be clear as to where to get that information. Parents are divorced, but both incomes were listed or a step-parent's information was not reported. Obviously, if biological parents are married and they've always been married, then who's considered a parent is super easy. You list both. But nowadays, we're dealing with more and more single-family households. We're dealing with more grandparents raising grandchildren. And who's considered a parent on the form may not be as a parent as it once was. This is probably one of the issues that I would draw your attention to the help function even more. If you are in one of those different situations, a grandparent raising a grandchild, a legal guardianship circumstance, read the form because it will give you guidance. You don't want to submit information on a parent that's not necessary. So read it and get the specific guidance for your circumstances. A good rule of thumb, let's just deal with a divorce situation. The rule of thumb is you only report the parent's information that is supporting you more than 50%. That's typically the person that you're living with. There are some certain cases where you might be living them 50-50 and you can't really pinpoint you live with mom more than you do dad. In that instance, you can review and see whoever claims them on the tax return. But usually it's the one that they live with. So let's say I've got a family, I've got mom and dad, they are divorced. However, I live with my mom. It's my mom's information on the FAFSA form. My biological father doesn't appear anywhere on this FAFSA form. I don't list his name, his birth date, none of his tax information, none of his asset information. He doesn't exist for purposes of this form. It's just mom's information. If my mom is remarried, however, I must submit my stepfather's information. And I know that's always a bone of contention with folks because step-parents don't typically have any financial responsibility, but he is a contributing member of our household, therefore I must also list my stepdad. So parents are divorced, I live with my mom, it's mom's information and stepdad's if she's remarried. Grandparents, unless you've legally adopted, you would not be considered a parent. Legal guardians, you have to have legal guardianship documentation. So again, review and make sure that you are reporting the correct information for parents. If you have any questions whatsoever, you can either contact me and I can help guide you, or you can contact the individual school and they can help guide you if you are in need of that assistance. Make sure you go back to 3rd grade arithmetic, round your figures up. If you mean to put $299, don't put 299.00. Hopefully the computer won't allow you to do that, but if you do, that's going to read it, instead of $299, it's reading it as $29,900. Huge difference when talking about assets and income, so make sure that you are reporting them accurately. Don't use decimals, round your figures up, and you should be fine. As I've mentioned, the Department of Education does lots of different cross-checks within the other agencies. For instance, we've already mentioned the Social Security Administration. There is a selective service match, so all male students who are at least 18 must register for the selective service, the military draft. I know it's archaic, we haven't had a draft in many, many years, but it is still a requirement. So if they cannot confirm that that selective service registration has occurred, the first page of that student aid report will draw your attention to it and note that you need to get that submitted. There is a question about a drug conviction. It is a self-reported drug conviction question, but students that are convicted of certain drug offenses may jeopardize their financial aid eligibility. So if for whatever reason that question pops up, that first page of that student aid report will draw your attention to it. Don't automatically assume, if you're a parent looking at the form, that your students had a drug conviction. More times than not, they just answered the form incorrectly. It will draw your attention to how to get that resolved. Citizenship. Only those that are either U.S. citizens or eligible non-citizens, those with alien registration ID numbers, are eligible for federal financial aid. If for whatever reason that cross-check could not be performed, the first page of the student aid report will draw your attention to it, and they will note how to get that corrected. Most of the time, you're going to be sending the schools individual documentation. For instance, we see a lot of folks that may have been adopted as children. Homeland Security does have a backlog, so don't panic if you see this. You know that that's your circumstance. Don't assume that your student isn't a legal resident. Just submit the documentation that you've received, whether that's a passport or naturalization papers. Just get that information into us and we can get that resolved, okay? After you review the student aid report, then it becomes kind of the onus is on the school to review it. As I said, we're getting the same results, and we will use those results in that EFC, that expected family contribution, in combination with something that's called the cost of attendance. So we're going to look at this cost of attendance, which, as you can see from the bullet points, includes direct costs like tuition and fees, things you're going to be directly paying the school, room and board, and then an allotment for other expenses that you may not necessarily be paying directly to the school. So each school will compile this cost of attendance for each individual student. It will be different for each student, and it is different at each school. The cost of attendance at Roanoke is more than the cost at Virginia Western. I'm going to demonstrate that in the next slide, but it's important to note that this cost of attendance will be individually calculated at each school for each student. We will then use that cost of attendance and the EFC to determine financial need. And that financial need is how the schools will determine the financial aid that will be available to the students. This next slide just kind of gives you an example. Gives you a little bit of a situation where we've got one student. She's interested in 3 colleges, all at varying costs. One's $30,000, one's $15,000, and one's $10,000. Now she fills out the FAFSA form one time, and her results are an EFC of $5,000. So this just demonstrates that each school has a different cost. We all get the same EFC, but financial need is very different from school C or school 3 versus school 1. And I show you this to demonstrate that yes, school 1 is more expensive. However, the opportunity for financial aid is greater at the more expensive school. So don't automatically assume because college 1 is way more expensive than college 3 that you can't afford it, because the opportunity for financial aid will be greater and potentially could get the cost of college 1 down to something that's more equitable with college 3. So that's how we use the FAFSA form. Again, review that student aid report, make sure it's accurate because schools will be reviewing and making financial aid packages available to you. Now that we've delved into the applications and how you apply for the aid, whether it's through the college application, the CSS profile, the FAFSA, now I want to go through the different opportunities for financial aid, the different aid that will be available to your students should you complete those individual applications. The first slide draws your attention. We've talked a little bit about these already. These are those merit scholarships, grants, awards, the ones that do not need to be repaid. These are the ones that I already mentioned may require a separate application, and you're going to review and contact each individual school to know for certain, or you're going to go to that website that I gave you at the very beginning to check and see if they can tell you if applications are required. But these are the ones that are awarded either based upon academic performance and or athletic ability or performance ability, like a music or a choral. To give you an example of how things work at a lot of the schools, I'll tell you how it works at Roanoke. Once you are accepted to the college, the admissions office will send up an academic profile. They'll have your high school GPA, test scores if we have them. Again, realizing the pandemic, that a lot of the score opportunities are not available, or the testing opportunities are no longer available at this point. Hopefully that'll ease up in the spring. So if we have test scores, they will send that to us. We will then automatically award the students any merit-based aid that they qualify for. Okay? If we have the ability to offer athletic scholarships in conjunction with the coaching staff, you may be extended athletic scholarships, or again, choir scholarships, all of those different things that I talked about previously. A lot of times these scholarships are awarded for up to 4 years. It is important for you to ask that question at the individual school. When we present a financial aid package to you as a rising college freshman, you're in your high school year, your senior year, what you'll want to do is ask, is this secure for each year, or do I have to reapply each year? If it is renewable, what is the GPA requirement? So ask those questions so that you go into it knowing whether or not you're going to have to fill out this institutional application every year, or if it's just a one-time thing. At Roanoke, we present it to you as a freshman, and as long as you maintain a 2.0 GPA, we're going to award it for subsequent 3 years. So you'll have a total of 4 years of eligibility. And that's the case at many schools, but there are some schools that will make you go through the process every year. So again, educate yourselves, know if that application is required, and know going into it as you're making a decision whether or not each and every one of those scholarships will be available for the 4 years. Next, we're going to talk about the need-based grant assistance that comes as a result potentially of filling out that FAFSA form. Again, available October 1st. As you start to receive those results, schools will receive them, and we will automatically review students for the grants that I'm talking about on this particular slide. Federal Pell Grant Program, probably the most well-known grant program that's out there from the Department of Education. It is always part of the presidential debates. Hasn't been this year because we really haven't had much debating going on in this campaign. But it is probably, as I said, most well-known. It is a grant program that is reserved for the most needy of families. It's not as simplistic as this, but you're usually talking about families with adjusted gross incomes of about $40,000, $50,000 or less. So not everyone qualifies. However, if you do, you can see the award ranges that we're dealing with for the current year, anywhere from $640-ish to about $6,300. We will automatically award it to you. And that's going to be the case whether you come to Roanoke, Virginia Tech, Virginia Western, wherever you're going to go, it should automatically be awarded to you. You don't even have to stay in the state. It's going to be available automatically. You're not going to need to call and say, hey, Melissa, will you review Sally for the federal Pell Grant? It's automatically going to be included in that package. The next award up here that you could potentially gain eligibility for as a result of filling out that FAFSA is the Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, also known as SCOG. That is a bit of a mouthful. Some award letters will abbreviate it, so just be aware that they are one and the same. That is, again, a federal grant that is available to families, usually the most needy of families. So a lot of schools, because of the allotment the Department of Education gives, it typically is awarded just to federal Pell Grant families, $40,000, $50,000 or less, and it could range. Each school is given an allotment, and they are given the guidance that they're given really very little guidance. They can spend it however they would like. Usually it is, again, for Pell Grant recipients, there is that little bit of guidance. But the awards could range. Our allotment at Roanoke College is very small. So our award ranges are typically anywhere from $200 to $400 a year. which may not seem like much, but it's $200 to $400 less that's coming out of your pocket. Some schools have a much greater allotment, and it could go all the way up to $4,000. So a pretty big range. Because this program is a specific allotment, once that allotment is spent, that's it. This particular grant is the reason why you would want to fill out that FAFSA form as soon as possible, so that you can take full advantage, get there while the pot is full. We have students that are, here we are about a month into classes at Roanoke, and we have students that have yet to fill out the FAFSA form for the current year that we're in. Those students are going to be out of luck. If they fill out the FAFSA form today and they're eligible for the SEIG, we've spent those funds. They were well spent way back early in the summer months. So those students unfortunately have missed out because they missed the deadline. So make sure to fill out the FAFSA form if you think you might qualify for the Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grants, that you get the full benefit. Several schools will also offer supplemental grants. These are just need-based grants that the colleges, based upon their allotments and endowments, are able to provide. As I said earlier, these particular grants from the federal government are reserved for the most needy of families. So not everybody's going to qualify. And the federal definition of financial need, as I said, is usually about $40,000 to $50,000 adjusted gross incomes or less. Supplemental grants tend to be much broader. At Roanoke, we have families with six-figure incomes that have students attending Roanoke that are getting supplemental grant funds. So it is considered a need-based grant because you have to demonstrate financial need, you have to fill out the FAFSA form, but our definition of financial need is much broader than the Department of Education. So this is the grants that I would point to you all, those that are sitting and listening to this presentation saying, you know what, I've had students go through the process, I've had a coworker go through the process, and it really hasn't been worth it. They always tell me it's not worth the time to fill out the FAFSA form. If you don't fill out the FAFSA form, that's fine. It's not required at most schools. It's highly recommended, but it's not required. I can't tell you with any certainty, though, if you're applying to Roanoke, you don't do the FAFSA form, and then you come to say, hey, Melissa, is this the best package that you can get to me? I can't tell you with any certainty unless you do the FAFSA form, because I can't review you for supplemental grants. So I would encourage everyone to fill out the FAFSA form at least once. If it yields grant funds, that's great. That was well worth it. If all it yields is a student loan and you don't want to take advantage of the student loan, no worries. Just don't do it subsequent years. But even if it yields $1,000 in supplemental grant funds, I think it was worth it. Because that's $1,000 times potentially 4 years that's not going to be coming out of your pocket. So again, know what's offered by your school. If there is a supplemental grant program, fill out that FAFSA form just to see if you'll qualify. State of Virginia, if you're going to a public school, there is something called the Virginia Commonwealth Award. Again, reserved for Pell Grant recipients, but if you think you're going to be eligible, contact the school and check and see if there's an additional application, anything that you need to do to secure that. Those are the grant opportunities. Now the next slide draws your attention to the loan opportunities. Each and every student that fills out the FAFSA form will qualify for a federal Stafford loan. There is what's called subsidized and unsubsidized. The only difference is who is responsible for the interest. Subsidized is interest-free to the student while they're enrolled. Unsubsidized interest accrues. So as I said, every single student is going to be awarded, and these are the amounts that you will obtain. If you fill out a FAFSA form, every freshman will receive $5,500. Now a large portion of it may be subsidized, a large portion may be unsubsidized, but you are going to get a $5,500 student note. This is a loan that would be in the student's name. Parents are not co-signers. So it's basically the federal government offering freshmen, 17, 18-year-old students, $5,500 loan at a very reasonable rate. There's the rate that we're currently looking at, less than 3%, it's 2.75% fixed, to help fund your education. Obviously, if loans are not needed, that's great, that's fine. You don't need to take advantage of it. But if you do need loans, and a large chunk of our students nowadays with the economy we're dealing with do need to take advantage of loans. I took advantage of loans when I went to Roanoke. This is the loan program that you want to look at. And that's because the interest rate is fixed, and also the fact there is no cosigner. Every student will be eligible for this. There will be a subsequent promissory note, but there is no credit check, so every student can have $5,500. Now again, if you don't need them, that's fine. We're going to present it to you, and then you just tell us whether or not you want to take advantage of it. If you don't want it, draw a line through the award letter, return it back to the school, and they can take it off. But if you need loans, take advantage of this one first. There is no required repayment while you're in school. You can choose to pay that interest on the unsubsidized loan while you're in school, but it's not required. And you will have 6 months after you either graduate or drop below half-time, and then you'll have up to 10 years to repay. So very competitive rate and great repayment opportunities. It's a great way for students to build a little bit of credit, put a little bit of responsibility on their shoulders. Mom and dad may be paying and footing the college bill, but if a student knows that they took out a student loan, they may be a little bit more inclined to do a little bit more in the classroom. It's entirely up to the family though. Again, take advantage of it if you need it. If you don't, that's great. Just let the school know that you do or do not want to take advantage of it. Okay. Another great opportunity to take advantage of that you will automatically be reviewed for if you fill out the FAFSA form is work study. This, out of all things financial aid, are the things that vary the most from school to school. So it's important that you understand how it works. Basically, this is an allotment that the federal government could potentially provide to work in an on-campus job. There are a very few opportunities off-campus. Mostly it's an on-campus, like working in the cafeteria, in the library, working as an RA in the dorm room. You may have an opportunity to be off-campus through an America Reads program, but most of it, is on campus. The amounts could vary from school to school. I'll tell you how this program works at Roanoke, which is very similar to a lot, but as I said, this does vary the most from school to school, so contact each individual school to know specifically how it works. At Roanoke, we will, if you qualify, award you a federal work study of up to $1,500. It is an opportunity to work. It is not a requirement, and it is not a guarantee of an opportunity of employment. We will provide that $1,500, and then we will create a job market. We've got a listing on our website of any job opportunities that are available on campus, but at Roanoke, it is entirely up to the student to secure that job. They may be asked to do an interview, they may be asked to fill out an application, but it is their responsibility to seek that out. Once they secure the job, they will work with the supervisor to set a schedule. It's anywhere from a couple hours a week all the way up, usually it's no more than 10 to 12 hours a week, but it really just depends upon the availability of the student and the needs of the office. They'll work with their supervisor to set a schedule. It'll be at least a minimum wage, maybe a little bit more. I'll be honest, we pay our students that work on our computers on campus more than we do the students serving food in the cafeteria. And that's simply because of the responsibility that we place in those students that are working on our computers, and the knowledge that's needed is a little bit more extensive. So that rate of pay will be set by the supervisor, and at Roanoke, each week they will fill out a timesheet and they are paid twice a month. Those funds go directly to the student, either through a physical check or directly deposited to their bank account, and they can use it for whatever they would like. At Roanoke, they are not required to pay their tuition. That differs from school to school. Some schools do automatically take it off tuition, so make sure that you know whether or not it's coming off tuition or if it's going to be available for spending money. It's very important that you know that difference, because if it comes off tuition and you choose not to work, that may mean that you have to pay more in your tuition bill. Whereas if it doesn't come off tuition, you choose not to work, then there's no additional cost for you. So make sure that you research, know how it works at each individual school. It's a great opportunity, one that I would highly suggest that students take advantage of if you qualify. Even if you don't see work study on the award letter, there are a lot of job opportunities on campus for students that are not federal work study. They would just be filling out a different timesheet. It works very similar, but it's a great opportunity to get out of the classroom, get out of the dorm room, out of your normal realm of friends, maybe meet some families, meet some other staff that you typically wouldn't interact with outside of your normal day-to-day. It's also a great resume builder. I actually was a student in our financial aid office for the 4 years prior to my job, so it was, in my instance, it led to a job opportunity. It's not going to be the case for most, but it certainly could be a great resume builder that someone may look at later on as you start to apply to grad schools and start to apply for additional jobs. At Roanoke, we are Lutheran affiliated, so we offer our Lutheran students $5,000 if they choose to attend Roanoke. Some schools may offer other scholarships based upon your denomination. Again, research and find out what the individual school offers so that you can take advantage of it if necessary. State of Virginia has several different grant opportunities that are available to students from the state of Virginia. Private schools have what's called the Virginia Tuition Assistance Grant. So that's what we have at Roanoke. You have to have lived in the state for at least a year. As long as you do and you fill out an application, you could potentially, this year I think it's about $3,500 that you are entitled to based upon your geographical location and your residency here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. The public schools have something very similar. It's the VGAP. Again, because of your location here in the state of Virginia and the fact that you are a resident, a bona fide resident, you are entitled to those funds. There's a Virginia Transfer Grant. This next slide just lists additional ones through the state of Virginia. It also starts mentioning some outside funding. Those are funding sources that you secure on your own through outside organizations to help cover the costs. They could be anywhere from Virginia Space Consortium or the Gates Millennium Scholarships, the Robert C. Byrd Scholarships. These are all things that you will secure on your own. Now, guidance counselors have great listings and can be great resources to help identify these scholarships. There's also lots of different search engines. Here's some more examples of outside scholarship. Lots of different search engines out there. For instance, FastWeb, which is FASTWEB.com, where you'll set up a profile, you'll answer lots of different questions, and as scholarships are loaded into their database that meet your profile, you'll get an email to tell you about them. Take advantage of any that you may qualify for, apply for them, because they are great opportunities to help get those funding sources down. Students.gov is another great resource to help find those outside funding sources, things that you will secure on your own. Also check parents' employers. We've got some in here in the Roanoke Valley that offer scholarships to the children of their employees. Take advantage of those. Target Corporation has a big national scholarship. And while you may not think that you're going to qualify because it's a huge national scholarship, don't just write it off. Take the opportunity to fill it out. Even if you only secure $1,000, that's $1,000 less that's going to come out of your pocket. So take advantage, search for these outside funding, employ the assistance of the guidance counselors here at the high school. Roanoke has a website, a bulletin board of anything we're eligible or that our students are eligible to apply for. So research, take some time. A lot of these outside funding sources, the deadlines are in January or February. So now is the time to start looking and applying. The Education Foundation, Roanoke County Education Foundation has some outside scholarships. So take advantage, start researching, identifying who these are, set yourself up maybe through FastWeb or students.gov so that will help kind of identify what you may qualify for, okay? And then finally, the final payment opportunity that will come into play are the different repayment schedules that are available. After we review at the school level for institutional aid, we'll review you for federal aid, we'll review you for those entitlement and self-help funds that we've identified in the previous slides. We're then going to send out an award letter that will pretty much give you a bottom line figure. Some schools will do the math for you. We'll give you your costs minus your financial aid and bring you right down to a bottom line figure. When you start to get award letters, when you have those bottom line figures, those final award letters, that's when the ball is kind of hit back to you in the court. Where you research and you look and say, okay, is this something that can financially be feasible for my family? A lot of schools will offer different opportunities to help finance that remaining balance. They'll offer obviously cash and credit card payments. No college that I know of is going to turn those down. Some of them will offer payment plans. We'll take your balance and divide it into monthly payments that will fit better into your budget. There's also additional loan opportunities that are out there for the parent loan, the PLUS loan, or there are additional student loan opportunities. When you get that final award letter, that is your indication, so to speak, that you're ready to kind of delve and see if that is financially feasible. We've told you the balance. Now you as a family need to sit down, look at these different financing options to see if something is feasible so that you can then make your intentions known and deposit at that school so that you can enroll, okay? That again is those payment options. These will vary from school to school. At Roanoke, when we send that final award letter, we're going to send you a very nice handy dandy little payment schedule brochure so that you're going to know that these opportunities are available to you. A lot of schools will have these different opportunities, these payment arrangements out on their website. Again, educate yourself by going out there and seeing what's available at the individual school so that you know, you may have that remaining balance of $10,000 and that may seem insurmountable to you, but if you start to explore different ways to cut it down, that may make it more financially feasible, okay? A couple other sections, this one we'll go through pretty quickly. Scholarship searches, I've already mentioned. When searching for those outside funding sources, there are a lot of different opportunities. There's those, the search engines I've already talked about, the FastWeb, the guidance counselors, lots of different opportunities to help identify those additional funding sources. I do want to caution you, there are some private companies that are also available to help secure. I'm not a huge proponent of employing those companies, but maybe if you're super busy and you don't have the time and you know the importance of trying to get some of these, you need to take advantage of them, that's perfectly fine, but you do need to make sure that they are reputable companies. When you're looking for assistance and a company that's going to assist you, ask them these questions. As I said before, there are a lot of folks out there trying to make a buck on you, and this scholarship searches typically are where we see all of those kind of shadier type companies. So make sure if you need assistance and you don't want to ask the high school counselors, you don't want to ask the individual schools, you don't want to employ those databases just because you don't have the time, make sure to research so that you can effectively select a company that can assist you. Again, some helpful hints about making sure to select a company that's reputable so that you don't end up kind of costing more money in the future. That's all I really have to say about that, other than just make sure to search for those outside scholarships. Again, as I said, $1,000 secured through an outside funding source is $1,000 less that you're going to have to pay on your own. So something you definitely want to take advantage of. And then one of the final slides that I've got in here, I've got just a couple more. This I just want to draw your attention to, not specifically to each of the individual points, but so that you know that there are some different tax credits out there. These have been out for many, many years, so we are finding more and more people are educated about them, but there are still a lot that do not realize that there are tax credits available to you, and they don't take advantage of them. So while this may not be something that's on your docket for this filing status or for this upcoming filing tax year, it is something that if you go into college, you'll want to take advantage of either the HOPE scholarship credit, which is for freshman and sophomore, or the lifetime learning tax credit. Make sure if you do your own taxes that you research and take advantage. If you pay someone to do your taxes for you, make sure that they review and see if you might be eligible, because these are credits on your taxes, so it's money back. Definitely something that you want to take advantage of. And then my final informational slide is just some additional websites. I've mentioned FastWeb, I already mentioned scholarships.com. There's just a couple additional ones that I think you'll all find a little bit more useful. I'll have more information. I can't stress, I signed up with FastWeb when I was a student, and they continued, I did not go on to graduate school, but they continued to send me emails of scholarship opportunities that were loaded to their database that I could potentially apply for. So some great resources that I would encourage all of you to take advantage of, as well as the individual websites that are out there. Usually this is where I offer opportunity for questions. Obviously we can't do that electronically, so I did want to stress, I did give you my contact information up here. Unfortunately all my little URLs are a little bit lighter, but I do encourage you all, if you have questions or you would simply like a copy of this presentation, just either shoot me an email, give me a call, and I'll be glad to share. And as I said earlier, obviously my allegiance is to those first that are applying to Roanoke, but I will gladly make an opportunity available if you have questions. If you're not interested in Roanoke, that's totally fine. I've had families that have sat in my office and I helped them fill out the FAFSA form that then went on to the University of Tennessee or a school in New England. So please do take advantage of my contact information, and I will be glad to assist you. I hope you all learned a little bit more about financial aid, and feel free again to contact me with any questions. Thank you.